Please welcome Michayla Grbich.
Hello, thank you for all being here today. I'm Michayla Grbich, and I'm an illustrator. I received my BFA in illustration from MCAD back in 2019. Coming back here has really been an incredible opportunity and a privilege. Being here has allowed me to reconnect with the strongest part of myself, my creative practice, and allowed me to center myself in both joy and empathy. In the words of the great singer-songwriter Stevie Nicks, I have no fear, I have only love. And in that spirit, I'd like to take a few moments to pause, as what I'm going to discuss may be triggering and I want to provide space. I will be discussing my experiences, not at length and limited to how it relates to my creative practice, as a lot of my work is being generated in the want for support, advocacy, and visibility. I am a survivor of sexual assault, and it has taken me a long time to share this in a way that feels fully comfortable. I say this because it is the least character defining and ultimately the least interesting thing about me, because I'm also a daughter, a friend, a horse girl, and an illustrator, all of which are far more relevant to who I am as a person and far more interesting to share. I say this because going through the varying phases of healing has changed my art and the way creating even feels to me. Making work has become something that is very empowering and joyful, and it allows me to work through things that can be really heavy to carry in a way that is based in self-empathy as opposed to muscling through on will alone. So it would be totally facetious of me to not acknowledge that a lot of my art now originates from the space of wanting to engage with agency I did not have, the empathy I needed, and the want to pay it forward in the best way I know how to, through my art. In my time in this MFA program, I have been focused on making projects that I really felt like I needed to make, the first of which was Lapel de Vide. This was a collage scene using media from advertisements and pop culture-based magazines that I interpolated into topics like women's rights, societal pressures, processing sexual assault, and personal beliefs and experiences in relation to all of this. Dissecting words from their original contexts and framings felt like the structuring of a new narrative, one that I could physically assemble from scratch and dictate as I saw fit. I then compiled and layered these visual narratives with stickers that felt more distinctly based in girlhood, childhood, and femininity to connect with the deep roots these topics have. Media, violence, censorship, and femininity and pop culture are living together in one stream of consciousness in a publication. I often find I don't have all the answers I'm looking for yet, and I'm still learning, and I'm okay with that, but I do know that Artemisia Gentileschi has been a guiding light in this endeavor. For a long time, I didn't actually like her work. It was just too real, too weighted, emotional, and direct in a way I couldn't understand from artwork. It felt like a confrontation. Now I understand that that is the entire point of her work and why she created. And her use of eye contact and self-portraiture is something I've really taken hold of as a point of interaction in my own practice. My project, Cosmically Gaslit, is the most direct line to her, and I'm going to pause to ask a question of you all. Has anybody else used CoStar? Yes. Okay. Is it also mean to you? Yes. Thank you for indulging my curiosity, because for a good stretch of time, I was just consistently getting the most unhelpful, ominous, and genuinely mean horoscopes, and so I started cataloging them, and I kind of cherry-picked the ones that I felt could be the most interesting or most juxtapositional. Because horoscopes are interesting to me just as like a little side thing, because there's something that is given without really being asked, but it's up to us to place real value in them. Essentially, they're just a sentence, but we kind of assign our own value to them. This is kind of something I found relative to places I've grown in and out of. So a lot of this project is actually about confronting this feeling in my hometown and using color to push the mixed feelings within that. So like the sadness, the excitement, the kind of weirdness that all brings. So because this project's narrative backbone is my horoscopes, all of the depictions of people are me. They're all self-portraits because it's kind of a part of me that I've assigned value to. It made sense to me. There's also a bit of melodrama, illustrated tears, and downturned eyebrows, which is in service of conveying an emotion relative to the horoscope over the reality of. The settings, it's kind of continually asking if the viewer feels or has felt the same. It's a lived experience and examination of factors beyond our control and circumstances we can reflect on, ultimately making do with what we're given and finding new ways to explain it to ourselves and others. I'm also inspired by Sofia Coppola's films because they're very woman-centric in a way that doesn't feel exploitative and provocative. This is something I'm especially drawn to because across the arts there's often a gaze that feels predatory or entertainment that is hard to avoid and harder for me to actually engage with. So I look to her cinematographic sensibilities and storytelling as inspiration to creating space that feels more agency-based than traditional handlings. I Say Unto You is one of my longest form projects thus far, and it lives as a zine and as posters. It is an account of 8 saints, all girls and women, because the depictions associated with them are historically really based in violence or trauma. Most of the time, they're either just about to die or there's a lot of fear held in these moments, or it is explicitly them after they've been martyred. So even in their deaths, there's been no getting away from the final moments of their lives, which really doesn't feel fair to me. They were all also incredibly young. The average age across this 8-piece series is only 18, and they often became the patron saints for what they were martyred for in the first place. So they essentially died to become the person that they themselves needed most so that later generations would not know that same loneliness. This again does not feel fair. This series of 8 were all made as risographs as I wanted to learn what the medium could really do, and all 8 used 3 color layers to achieve this. In this approach, I wanted to bring the more historically Christian iconographic treatment to the space of risograph, which is historically more associated with DIY scenes and Riot Girl. In my own research and opinion, saints are the part of religion that are ostensibly for the people, so I wanted to handle them in an art space that also evoked that same ethos. There was also a written component of this project, which was important to me. I know you can't ever really tell an audience how to consume your art, but feeling so close in proximity to these themes, which have unfortunately never seemed to fully change throughout history, made me feel strongly that I needed to provide clarity in where exactly I was coming from here. The saints, like the spread of Joan of Arc, were accompanied by either a poem or an ekphrastic essay based on my research of their lives and imagery and my own feelings I gathered from learning about them. While being in this program, my illustrations have become more tactile and experiential, and I don't want to get too academic here because it's probably the funnest part of my practice and I really love doing it. So I make big sparkly art of things I love that I want to show off and make sparkle. And I have a lot of fun doing it. This idea actually started with exploring topics more rooted in Christianity and other religious denominations. I grew up Serbian Orthodox. The church I went to, St. Sava Serbian Orthodox Cathedral in Milwaukee, has floor-to-ceiling mosaic works, and this was actually where I first thought about art as art. The first piece I actually made in this program was St. George and the Dragon. This was my first experiment in this area, and I wanted to use the rhinestones and gold leaf within to call back to the gold and shiny mosaics I'd grown up around, but using my own hand. Having it be more freeform in format was essential, as I wanted to push engagement with the viewer and have them feel like they had just been dropped into the scene with them. I wanted to see my piece living outside of a frame. From here, I also experimented further by layering illustrations on top of each other. The earliest iterations of these were cut by hand from foam core. I don't do that anymore. I use the laser cutter and they're on wood. Because that took quite a while. Go figure that would take quite a while. Anyways, I moved on to The Ladies of Music, which was a series of illustrations celebrating music icons that have received the pop culture title of Queen in their respective genres in an iconographic way that feels more joyful and camp than traditional Christian iconography. This series is about celebrating women who excelled in art in the ways they style or styled themselves, because I think when making portraits of recognizable public figures, it's really important to take into account their self-depiction. It keeps them as the person they chose to be, not as a culturally idealized version of themselves. This is why Nina faces to the side. She was parallel to audience when she performed, and why Dolly's dress and hair are so emphasized. She's super aware of her self-caricature. All of these explorations within projects are leading me to a style that is more layered incorporating mixed media techniques and collage and illustrations that feel more densely compact and full of details that bring levity, humor, and are also revealing into the content I am interested in conversing with. To speak directly on this, my thesis will be a reinterpretation of historic paintings by men that depict women, but reclaiming them with a gaze that gives more agency, empathy, and individuality to the figures of men. Their stories become more theirs. This is a color study, a sketch of my take on John Everett Millet's Ophelia. She will no longer be inches from either shore, inexplicably drowning in the world's narrowest stream. She will be breaking the frame in her historic condition. I'm personally really invested in where all this is going because I feel like all of the threads I've been weaving kind of simultaneously are being more woven together. And it's getting to a point where my messaging is also becoming more clear and direct through that. So I'm very excited to see how this goes and continuing down this road. And I know she would be too. And to circle back to Stevie Nicks, I still see your bright eyes. Thank you all for being here, but my biggest thanks has to go to my mentor, Brian, for helping guide me through my works with the right balance of patience, knowledge, and humor, no matter how many horses I draw. So you're a real trooper for that. Thank you all so much, and I'll open up the space for some questions.
Can you talk about, so you use a lot of sort of archetypical forms, whether they're myths or now looking more back into art history. Can you talk about how that interacts with you expressing your own more personal content through those mediums and methods?
Yeah, so I'm really interested in archetypes and like different mythologies and like that kind of framework because these stories are so repeated. Like you'll find similar like threads throughout different cultures, so it's just interesting to me how different points are really just so repeated, and some of them really resonate with me more than others, like whether it's like the art content or like the actual backbone of the story. And for me, especially in the I Say-thon to You, it was doing the research and then reflecting and finding the points of connection that either emotionally or historically kind of I connected with and wanted to, I guess, change the context and like reframe. So I'm not trying to change history, it's just giving a pivot point as like an alternate, you know?
So I noticed that you incorporated text for the first time in I Say It Unto You, and that the text is separate from the images. And I'm wondering, like, what is the relationship between image and text for you? Would you ever consider putting them together, or are these just kind of like they're two separate expressions?
Yeah. So I do gig posters like on the side. It didn't really make it into this just because kind of hard to distill almost 2 years into like one presentation, but I Say Then to You was the first time I was really writing like longer form things, so I did like the essays and the poems. And when I was making that, I was really thinking about how the whole project would live together because there's the prints that are framed and there's the black mats and the thick black frames, and I wanted to make a zine that kind of reflected that. So for me, it was kind of an exercise in figuring out the spacing because 3/4 of the page is black and then there's a little sliver. So it was developing the dialogue with the text and how that could relate to the image.
Using the laser cutter, has it changed your practice at all?
Yes. I never worked 3D before this. I just really kind of got the bug once I had like access to MCAD's facilities again, and it's been really fun to see my art living in more 3D spaces because for so long it was just like kind of on my website or on social media or like putting it in a frame and like shipping it off to a gallery and like not really ever seeing it. So I like making work that like draws you in, and I want to experiment further, kind of having the art be the deepest point, so you have to like physically kind of go in. Yeah.
I have a question.
in your kind of ideal fantasy, maybe this is impossible, but who cares world, would you make work for a cathedral or a church space? You just seem, your work's so obviously inspired by it. Like, could you imagine that?
I don't know. That's like a really good question because I've not thought about it because I guess I just grew up in a space that was just so filled with content that I hadn't my own work there. It would be really cool because there's such a history in like the formatting, like the altarpieces, pushing that interaction. Interesting. I would like to figure out more like larger scale work. Vivian?
With a lot of your subject being historical, what are some of your before you complete the project?
Yeah, I try to read a lot of books. So I'm at the MCAD library a lot, and I use their I kind of we have WorldCat or EBSCO. So I go down that wormhole, and I just like I look for the oldest references and then the newest, and try and see if there's anything that is like substantially changed. And I kind of backtrack from there to figure out when and if there's a why I can find.
It was cool to see how like your childhood experience with those mosaics sort of influences the aesthetic of what you're doing. I'm curious with the kind of recognizable paintings that you're reinterpreting, are those ones that you have a personal connection to, or is it more like images of cultural importance?
More images of cultural importance where there's kind of like a perpetuated archetype that I can also kind of pull from. But some of them I do have like more of a personal connection to, in that like I've seen them since I was young and like loved them, and now I want to see like if I had made the piece, what would it look like?
Please give a round of applause.
Thank you.